everyone, welcome back to the Earth Dawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters. With your questers Josh and Dan, I'm Dan.
I'm Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things Shosarical. Once again, we're going to switch back from the Western Kingdoms back to Shosara because I freaking chose to do so. So if you have any questions for us, please drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. We are slamming into a completely different break over here to do some other talking about the free companies of Shosara, the city of Sales. This is the further, once again, back up north from the Western Kingdoms. So there we are. This goes along with the Laraskova Renel, the Navalok Renel, the Kistova settlement, and the Alliance. So this is one more group of factional people to deal with to get people to go play in the northern Shosaran kingdom.
Yeah, we did mention them real briefly when we were going over the city itself, because there is a thing that is, there's one of the buildings there, like next to the harbor, that is the base of operations of the free companies.
Yes, we'll get there. So yeah, this is just, I think, honestly, including the free companies is the easiest way to get your players to become part of the interactivity of the Shosaran nation. So we'll get to exactly how in a minute, but this is how to get there. So anyway, so the free companies are the best way for adepts that are not members of the free companies to find work. And we'll get there. So here's some history on the free companies. When the separation from Wormwood was decreed by Queen Phyla, all Shosarans were trained in warfare since the region was kind of harsh and untamed. But these were all citizen soldiers, not exactly sufficient to be a standing army.
Yeah, just a militia, basically.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that scene in 300 where he says, hey, Athenian, what's your job? I'm a potter. Hey, what's your job? I'm a cobbler. Hey, what's your job? I'm a farmer. Great. Spartans, what is your profession? That's kind of the thing. So the free companies are made up of Spartans in this case. So the Shosaran leaders begin recruiting adepts and mercenaries, people you pay to do certain things, and they forged and contracted and patented them into a small band of fighting forces that could be deployed quickly to areas of need within Shosara.
Yep.
So
that's the premise.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. So first contracts were against any marauding beasts and any magical creatures, and therefore, by extension, protecting vulnerable settlements against bandits or pirates, depending upon where the settlement was located, on the shore or more inland. But this distribution of contracted adventuring eventually led to a gradient command structure, kind of like a military pyramid. The general's in charge of these lieutenants, the lieutenants are in charge of these privates, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know military structure, so don't come at me with that. So just go from there. So as each unit of the free companies is mercenary in nature, they get paid. And any thoughts on pay structures from this?
Not specifically.
Fair.
My thoughts on economics in fantasy role-playing games have been expressed before, which is to say, if you think about them too hard, they fall apart.
Yeah.
If your player characters are not directly involved in working for the free companies or working with the free companies, the pay structure, the whatever, doesn't really matter. Yeah. And if they are, then the pay structure is whatever you have decided is appropriate pay for your player characters to do tasks.
Yeah. Whatever they need to get to the next circle, that's what you pay them.
This is a fantasy adventure role-playing game. This is not an economics simulator.
Yeah. Don't get hung up on the money. It's not what it's there for. It's really not what it's there for. So eventually, since they contracted all these adventurers and adepts and mercenaries, and they took care of kind of taming the lands and the magical beasts and the marauding pirates and so forth and so on, eventually the lands kind of became more tame and manageable. The bandits were run off or imprisoned. The free companies were therefore assigned more toward national defense because that's what was left over. And they built a shipyard and founded the Grand Arsenal, which is where their current headquarters are on one of the coasts of Shosara.
It's at the southern end of the harbor, if I recall correctly. Yes, because the Great Lighthouse is at the northern end, the arsenal is at the southern.
Correct. Okay. See? Your memory's great. As part of all of this, since the lands were tamed and they created the national defense, and they started working toward national defense, and they built the grand arsenal, of course, somebody has to be in charge. And so they elected a grand captain. And the grand captain happens to be on the Council of Princes. Begrudgingly, as the Renells see it, they didn't want somebody who was not, part of one of the Renells on the council, but there you are.
Yeah, the problem there is that they essentially had a military force that, while contracted, sort of a professional military force that was under contract as mercenaries after a fashion.
Yeah.
But the argument was presented that we have been fighting for you and spilling blood for you and protecting you and doing what you ask. We ask that we at least have some say in how this land is governed and ruled. Yes. And perhaps a little bit of persuasion being involved there, being, if you don't, I happen to have an army at my beck and call that can enforce this. Do you want to put me on your council, or will I need to stage a coup?
Or
while the noble houses do have their own militias, they would not be able to stand up to the well-trained professional fighting force that are the free companies.
Yeah. Or just I control the army. Go ahead, and next time you get invaded, let's see if my army shows up in your defense or not.
Yeah. Shosara itself, like the main city, hasn't ever really been under threat of invasion.
Yeah, not since the Scourge. And they survived the Scourge.
Yeah, and the Scourge invasion was not threat of foreign powers. It was just the general threat of horrors at the gates.
And the usual.
But that's sort of the balance point there.
Yeah.
The Renells, the commander of the free companies, went to them and said, hey, we want a say in what's going on here. And they're like, we'll give you a seat on the council so that you can have your say, and also perhaps prevent you from using that force that you are in command of to cause us problems.
Exactly. So, and that's fine. So you just brought up the militias here, and this is my next point as well. So here's how things are currently operating. So that was some history as to how things got started and how they kind of got to where the point that they are. So the current operations of the free companies, most little settlements outside of the big ones have a militia, to Josh's point, that is paid for by that governing Renell, smaller family that they may be. They are rarely comprised of professional soldiers. This is usually, so I like to think of it as the movies involving drug lords in the 1980s movies that include like some kind of South American drug lord. One guy is employed that used to be a professional soldier. He's pseudo-trained everybody else, but it's usually Bubba and his cousin Vinny and their cousin, Toothless, or whatever the case may be. And so they're not professional soldiers. They're just the guys walking around with the guns. And so that's most of what these militias in Shosara are like, minus the guns. There's just somebody who had a little bit of training, kinda, sorta. If they're called upon, he's a body.
Yeah, and that was the case, honestly, for a lot of warfare throughout a lot of time. There would be professional soldiers that would be called up. You talk about the wars in medieval Europe and so forth. A lot of the infantry were militia folk, essentially called up
able
and
body
given stuff. Yeah. The Revolutionary War early on, it was all the American forces were largely militias.
Well, and I'm looking at Kevin Costner's Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves from 1991, where he was in the army, he was trained, and then came back and kind of trained the merry men as much as he possibly could. So they were more able and more capable a little bit.
Right. But the idea being, the difficulty with a standing army is that the standing army doesn't produce any goods or contribute economically to the society. It is, in some sense, a drain on the society, one that may very well be justified if you are living in a, say, dangerous land where horrors and strange beasts and things like that may cause problems. It's nice to have professional soldiers that you can dispatch to go and deal with trouble and not lose out on people who are working the fields to bring in the food that needs to feed everybody.
Yeah.
There is a potentially valid place for such things.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that's kind of the situation there. But then again, you also need to make sure that you are keeping those professional soldiers happy, because when professional soldiers are not happy,
bad things happen.
Yeah, they can potentially cause problems.
Agreed. So sometimes these small militias include a retiree from one of the free companies. So if you'd like to throw them in as an NPC, it's always a smart idea.
Often the sort of commander, trainer, leader.
Yeah. Usually the guy in charge, because they know what they're doing, and they can probably handle themselves quite nicely. So otherwise, like I said, most of these are just whatever able-bodied name givers can be found to back them up and be running the grounds of the militia that could be called into service if need be for an actual invasion or large war. So the free companies are a standing army, in air quotes. Should the need arise, they are a large force of adept troops, and they actually have a fleet of ships on behalf of the council in matters of national security. So they have ships at the ready, which means you're going to need boatmen if necessary. They also might have a couple of airships as well, just because. Not a lot of them, because the lighthouse does actually do some landing of airships there as well. So if you want to throw some airships in, go for it. They currently patrol important trade routes. We're building to something here, you can tell. Land routes mostly, sea routes as well. And they also currently, the free companies patrol the streets of the capital city of Shosara. So there's work to be done here. They are
a lot of work to be done.
Yes, they're also on retainer for any mysteries or phenomena reported to the council, and occasionally working with the Great Lighthouse, which is the school of magic and magical study. So that's just a part of where your groups can come in. There's also a large number of craftsmen and shipwrights overseen by weaponsmiths, professional, licensed, government-sanctioned weaponsmiths who've had proper training.
Yeah, employed by the free companies, which is another way that they make money to fund their endeavors and so forth.
Absolutely.
But in a sort of wild and untamed area that is those northern reaches around Shosara and the shores of the Gwyn Sea, there's a lot of work to be done, and oftentimes when the free companies themselves are not able to attend to something, they will dip into their coffers to pay freelancers, adepts, aka your player character groups, to go out and investigate and take care of things. Because they may not have the available manpower to check on something if something else is going on. And it also serves potentially as a vetting process for potential recruits. If adepts that they hire do well and show that they are capable and intelligent and able to handle problems on their own, then they may actually be officially brought into the free companies
to get more steady work. But at that point, you are sort of beholden to the grander political struggles. It's like the difference between player characters who are getting hired by the Eye of Thrall to do stuff for like individual missions, or characters who are actually working and employed by the Eye of Thrall formally and are dispatched out on that. Basically, like, that's their job, as opposed to they occasionally take temp work doing that. I was just going to say, or the more modern term of temp to hire.
Yeah.
Where you do the job
gig
for
work.
6 months. Yeah, gig work. You do the job for 6 months, and they go, oh, you do it well enough, we'll actually give you benefits now. So we'll sign you to make you a permanent employee and give you benefits. So things like that. So here's the thing. So, and basically there's oodles of artisans creating a steady income for the free companies as well. So you've got your weaponsmiths, your troubadours and things who are constantly creating stuff for the city of Shosara, the Grand Arsenal, the shipwrights, and yada, yada, yada. So it's just one of those constant work here. So any visiting adepts can find work on assigned bounties when work spills over what current free companies cannot handle. So to Josh's point. And there's also traditional mercenary work. You just paid. Go do this thing. Come back. That's it.
And one of the things that is kind of becoming a little bit more prominent is because of the political struggle about the future of elvendom between Shosara and Seriatha and Wormwood, Bloodwood. It's nice to be able to hire potentially deniable assets to go and perform espionage or other sorts of skullduggery in the pursuit of the grander political objectives.
Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to do this thing, which, if you get caught, we will disavow you completely and never say we knew you at all. So, those are fun mission impossibles.
One of the advantages that Shosara has in this espionage game is that they've got a very significant portion of non-elves, which makes it easier in some ways for them to infiltrate and perform such things, because elves from Shosara would be watched more closely, whereas other name givers are likely not to be quite so much.
Agreed. So there's your traditional mercenary work, there's spillover work, there's also guard assignments. You can escort or work on private lands. And again, to Josh's point, all of these can involve some kind of espionage, be it house espionage, nation espionage, tradesman espionage. Knock yourself out. And you can escort to the Trisora Renel to
your typical caravan guard type of mission.
Exactly. So to and fro with goods, bartering, whole lot of ROLE playing in all of these as well. And anything to do with any of Shosara's rivals. So, and they like hiring small mobile forces, which is air quotes, your adventuring group. So this is where, if you're going to get your players involved at all in any going on in the Elven nations to the north and to the west, the Western Kingdoms, Shosara, this is how to get them in there. It's the easiest way to do it. So if you didn't think anything we talked about beforehand had any way to get them in, this is kicking the door open.
Yeah, the free companies are essentially the player character organization that will be even if you are not fully on board with being part of Shosara as a national asset, it is still a fantastic source of work and information and resources. Being on good terms with the free companies means that you are likely to get access to their higher skilled artisans to do stuff, because I imagine that the more skilled weaponsmiths and craftsmen that work for them, their higher quality goods will be kept for the free companies themselves, and possibly being able to leverage favors with them to get access to that kind of material could come in handy.
And you also have access to the higher circle adepts you may want to train under.
That is true, particularly if you are of a more martial bent. When it comes to that, swordmasters and warriors and archers and so forth are probably easy to find mentors for that if you are part of the free companies or on good terms with them. Weaponsmiths certainly would have access to them as well, and established and well-run forges to do your own work and to be able to have time to do that.
I could see cavalrymen, because you have all kinds of frontier to go help tame as well.
Yeah, there could be some of that as well. Scouts and like plenty of opportunities like that is the kind of organization, in some ways, kind of like the adventuring companies that were set up in Haven for the Legends of Barsave to basically give player characters ready access to mentors that could train them and provide some frameworks for the jobs and work that needs to be done there.
Yeah. So one last thing about the free companies. Obviously, there's somebody in charge. That person currently is the Grand Captain Demira Alisar? Alisar. Fair enough. Never can tell how to pronounce fantasy names, so we're going to learn here today. So Grand Captain Demira is a dwarf weaponsmith who ascended because of their very capable craftsmanship and the bounties that they had accomplished. So she does a good job. She forged a trait network with Seriatha's Trisora Renel, so she's in charge of this. And so if anything's going to be going to and from Shosara and the Trisora Renel, likely has her say-so.
Yeah, involved. And if you recall, when we discussed the Trisora Renel a couple of episodes back, the Trisora Renel are able to skirt the prohibition against dealing with the separated elves by basically saying, oh, we're not dealing with the elves. it is Captain Demira who was sort of responsible for helping that happen, because she's a dwarf and is the one that has made all of those arrangements. And therefore, she's not an elf, so therefore she can't be separated from the Elven court, and it's okay for us to deal with them.
Because she's not a Renell. She's a free company. And she gets around it.
Well, it's more that she's not an elf.
Yes. Fair. And she, by the way, is the swing vote on the Council of Princes. So it's like it's a 2-2 split, and otherwise she casts her vote where she wants it to go to work either in her favor or in the interest of national security for the entire kingdom of Shosara. So,
which is something that she is very keen on.
Yes.
She's not super interested in the squabbles between the elves.
Nope.
Except in the ways that it will potentially threaten Shosara. She is fairly sure that, at least in some capacity, that conflict is going to result in war, whether that's actually between the elven nations themselves or somebody else may take advantage of the conflict and difficulties there to trigger a war, like the Denerastus, for example, which they are very fond of doing.
She's a nice character to use.
She is sturdy and paranoid. Maybe is not quite the word. Perhaps that's a little bit too strong, but she is concerned for the safety of Shosara broadly and is not interested in political grandstanding or personal political power.
No.
She uses her influence to balance the political tensions between the great Renels of Shosara, with an eye towards the safety of the kingdom overall, tends to lean more towards the reformist end of things, which makes sense because as a dwarf, she wants to make sure that all name givers, all citizens of Shosara are able to have a say in what's going on. But she also is not against a little bit of self-preservation and protection of everything for the kingdom.
Yeah, no, she's country first, personal second, because she wants to make sure that there's a country to operate in.
Yes.
At first. So she's all about national security, a little paranoid about spies, but otherwise, because she's done enough espionage on her end, she's worried about espionage coming back on her. So that's the nature of the spy game. I do a little, I know some happens to me. I do a little more, some more happens to me. It's all in good. As long as you get more than you're giving up, that's the way the spy network should be operating. So, but that's who that is. So if you cannot find a way using the free companies to get your adventuring group into Shosara, I don't know how to help you after this.
Not necessarily using them to get them into Shosara, but to give them things to do in Shosara and that area. The free companies are going to be a fantastic source because they, as effectively the standing military and the ones that are tasked by the Council of Princes and the various other powers of Shosara to go and deal with problems, they're the troubleshooters. They sometimes need to hire other troubleshooters to go and shoot the trouble. And so they are a ready source of missions and tasks and assignments of a wide variety, whereas some of the other factions and powers and so forth that we've talked about tend to have more narrow focus. The free companies are a smorgasbord of available missions and tasks and sources of payment. And other useful resources for adventuring adepts.
And this is a great way to tailor the adventure to what your party does well, because in a slightly military structure like this, they would look at what your capabilities are and go, well, you'd be best suited over here, and you'd be best suited over there. So they would absolutely play to the strengths of those characters. By all means, customize and tailor the adventure you're going to write for those characters. Instead of just doing a pre-gen and going, I have to modify it this way. You're all set. Just make it tailored to them, and you win on all accounts.
Yeah.
So I think the free companies is a fantastic way to get anybody involved, not only in Shosara, but in Earth Dawn in general. This is a great way to get anybody started, period. So this is a whole brand new sandbox to go play in.
Yep. It's really cool.
Yeah. I like that Josh is not arguing with me on this one. This is a new feeling for me.
I don't actually argue with you that
I know we do. We don't argue. You just correct me when I'm
provide
wrong.
some deeper clarification and insight.
No, you just correct me when I'm wrong, which is fine. You're the expert here. I'm just the host. Anyway, so folks, if you have any questions for us about this tonight, or if you've used the free companies, we would love to hear about it. By all means, please do tell us. We'd love to hear those stories or read those stories. So drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, go kick the door open, grab the loot, and stab your buddy in the back. It's very Munchkinly. For your legend.
Good night, everybody.